yesterday released the teaser for Season 2 of The Rings of Power, which will be out at the 29th of August 2024 and will also release that day with 3 episodes, if I understood this correctly. And yesterday we already had a long live stream, and this is basically the summary of what we talked about in this 5-hour long live stream. So if you are interested in all the discussion, maybe check the live stream VOD, otherwise this here is the short version. My name is Chris, aka The Philosopher's Games, and before we start, as always, a few disclaimers. I try to pronounce names as Tolkien described it. Shoutouts to the artists who allowed me to use their fantastic artworks. All their galleries are linked in the description. And also, spoiler warning, I assume that you have at least seen Season 1 completely, and also I will talk about stuff that might happen later in the season from the book's perspective. So keep this in mind, this is still a channel that covers the books a lot. Further, I'm not that positive on Season 1, I have to admit. I really tried to give it a chance, but especially with the last episode, it kind of lost me because it's so law inaccurate, and the writing is unfortunately very often simply bad. Some areas had really good writing, others not so much, and that makes it kind of a mixed bag for me. The first scene that we discussed quite a bit during the stream was this slimy, wormy monster crawling on the ground. And what could it be? We did not come to a satisfying conclusion, to be honest, but went through different possibilities. I think one possibility that is maybe not that unlikely is that it's simply Sauron, as it's mentioned in Season 1, that he was stabbed by Adar, and maybe due to him kind of dying, he has to take a new physical form, and this is like some in-between state, and he turns into what later becomes Halbrand. So that would mean that this is a flashback, and it doesn't really look like a flashback, but who knows, it could be. This would also be, in my opinion, very law inaccurate. First of all, Sauron does not get killed at the end of the First Age or beginning of the Second Age. That is not the case. And another indicator is that he still can take a fair form later on into the Second Age. In this context, we can read, for example, in the Appendix A of Lord of the Rings, he was unable ever again to assume a form that seemed fair to men, but became black and hideous, and his power thereafter was through terror alone. This was after losing this fair form later in the Second Age, and after that he couldn't take a fair form anymore. This now leads us a bit into the metaphysical aspect of Tolkien's world, and Tolkien wrote several texts about this. And for example, in Letter 200, he explains that for a spirit being an Ainur, which Sauron is, it takes energy or will to create a physical form. So they don't want to lose that. And in the stories of, for example, Beren and Luthien, we have a case where Sauron really tries to avoid losing his physical form. So that makes kind of sense that he doesn't want to lose power, of course, and invest new power of himself just to create another physical form. Another thing is that his original physical form was created when he was still one of the good guys. As a result, he could take easily a fair form. But after all the things he did in the First Age already, it is unclear if this evil that he committed to this point was already sufficient to prevent him from taking a fair form at this point, or if he had to commit more evil to reach this point. And at some point he will reach this point because of the quote I just read. But that is after the end of the whole Númenor plot, to not spoil too much. And that is something we will see in the show, and also already got hints in the show. To be fair, we are actually pretty close to the end of the Númenor plot, if that makes sense. If you're interested in this particular topic about Ainur, spirit beings, and their fana, their physical form, you find that in the Osanwe Kenta and also other texts from Nature of Middle-earth, and I guess also Morgoth's Ring. Further, there's also Letter 200, where Tolkien explains the concept of a spirit being needing will or power or energy to create a physical form. And just for context, I guess Halbrand is already considered a fair physical form, and he also needs the other fair physical form that was already shown in the teaser for Season 2, the form of Anatar. Another theory we came up with was that this might also be a very specific form of a Balrog, because in the chapter The White Rider from The Lord of the Rings, which we also see in parts in the film, Gandalf describes the fight with a Balrog as follows. Thither I came at last, to the uttermost foundations of stone. He, the Balrog, was with me still. His fire was quenched, but now he was a thing of slime, stronger than a strangling snake. Of course, it makes no sense for it to be Durin's Bane, but we already have seen him in the show, even though the trouble with the dwarves and Durin's Bane is only starting in the Third Age, not already in the Second Age. I don't know what the writers were thinking there, but who knows, maybe they work a little bit more on the Durin's Bane dwarves conflict, and we might see him again, maybe also having this weird different form here. In this context, Gandalf also mentions that he fell into water, so it could also be that Balrog plus water results in this form, not that he can transform into this just at will. Another thought I had that this could be a reference towards the Mulips. Tolkien wrote a poem published in The Adventures of Tom Bombadil called The Mulips, and these are also kind of weird creature living in marshes, so I can imagine them being somewhat slimy, maybe comparable to this, though to be fair, I would imagine them a little bit different. So it could just be a distant reference to those, and maybe just be its own new creature that appears in Rings of Power based on this poem. The Tolkien scholar John D. Radcliffe, I think, also assumed that he might have wanted to add the Mulips to The Hobbit, but then never did. Then we have the person with the bloody hands, I assume a woman, and first I thought it might be some weird vision of Miriel, but no, that seems not to be the case, because it looks very similar to one of these three supernatural women from season 1, so maybe one survived, and we also see, I assume, moths here in the background. Those we already saw in the first season in context of these three women. Not sure what's going on with them. Maybe it's also another woman from that order, whatever you want to call that. And it seems they will be back in season 2. I also can't think of any book reference they might be based upon. The next scene I want to talk about is this one here, where we see all these orcs going on a hike through the forest, and in the background we see a very tall guy, I assume a troll. We of course know how the trolls in Peter Jackson's adaptations looked, and I would assume they'd here go definitely for a different approach, and that might be actually interesting to see how the Amazon filmmakers interpret the trolls from the books. The next scene we see Celebrimbor, I assume, in his forge, and his forge is really bright, and there's a figure standing right in front of it, which is hard to see, but the silhouette gets a bit clearer at the end of the shot, and then it looks like the Eye of Sauron, which is of course a nice little touch here. And then, fitting to that, we see this new character here, which is not a new character, it's just Charlie Vickers with a wig and pointy ears. And yes, he is most likely Anatar, and he will play a very important role in the story surrounding the creation of the Rings of Power and the One Ring, as you potentially can imagine. Then we get the release date reveal, 29th of August, and in the background we see a city close to the sea. So there are multiple cities that this could be. In rumors and stuff we hear that Pelargir might be a place of importance, and that was also already indicated in the last season, so that is very likely. Other places could be Evelond, maybe even Dol Amros under a different name, and I don't know, Lond Dyer could be an option as well. However, somebody in chat suggested that it does not need to be on Middle-earth, it could also be on Númenor, and then the big mountain in the background would be Meneltarma. And as a result, the city could be Andúnie, which is the place of, or the city of the faithful, or it could also be Eldalonde, which is also on the west side of Númenor. Andúnie, though, should be in a bay, and Eldalonde is close to a river, and if you look a little bit to the right, you see a delta of a river that might lead inland, so I think it could be Eldalonde in this case, even though Andúnie would make far more sense. The next scene I want to talk about is with this sea monster and this woman that maybe gets eaten or tries to control the sea monster. It's not really clear what's going on there exactly. It could be one of these Rune women or maybe related to that. So maybe this is the Sea of Rune, who knows? Because in the background you see these rock formations, so it's maybe close to the shore or in the lake or something. So that would make kind of sense, I think, though there are not really sea monsters mentioned there. Tolkien wrote a poem early on that is published in Adventures of Tom Bombadil called Fastitocolon, and that is also the name of a monster, but it's more like a turtle fish. I'm not sure if this looks like a turtle fish or not. He's also not describing tentacles, if I remember correctly. So some people might also get more vibes comparable to the Watcher in the water that we know from Lord of the Rings. So maybe it is related to that or reference to that. Though there the tentacles should actually be glowing. That is not the case here, but in Peter Jackson's film they also don't glow. So maybe it's just some freedom the creators took here. Further, it's interesting that we see another sea monster, because they are not often described in Tolkien's book. We only have The Watcher in the Water and this one poem. This poem was potentially also written at one point and potentially not intended to be part of Tolkien's world anyway, but Tolkien, I think, mentions Middle-earth in it as well at some point, so he kind of made it part of the world. But these are the only two instances I currently can think of. The reason for this might be that the oceans, like I said, are largely unexplored in Tolkien's world, even by Tolkien himself. And a reason for that could be that Tolkien, or in Tolkien's world, the water is almost free of the evil influence of Morgoth. Morgoth put his power into the world itself and damaged it with it, but the oceans, as Tolkien writes in Morgoth's Ring, are almost entirely free of this influence. Of course, water can be corrupted by evil as well. There are some instances in the First Age that we can see, but neither Morgoth nor Sauron had many water forces, if that makes sense. Think, for example, that the Nazgul didn't really dare for a moment to enter the river. It almost feels like they feared the water because it's such a cleansing and pure element. It's at least my interpretation. And further also, that is the realm of Ulmo, definitely one of the more powerful Valar, and of course a foe of Sauron and of Morgoth. It could also be that this creature is also neutral and does its own thing, and maybe they try to bring it on their side or something. Then in one of the next scenes we see, I think, Durin the Third looking through a hole, and that looks kind of similar to the scene when Elrond and Durin the Fourth digging for further mithril and they close it down. I think there's also a little hole where somebody looks through it, so maybe he reopens this and wants to get more mithril. Who knows what they do. We also see something collapsing on a bridge. I think it is in Khazad-dûm in Moria. So it seems they want to bring some conflict to Moria as well. And the question is what they want to bring, because Moria was pretty safe in the Second Age and I think not much really happened there. They of course helped a bit out later in the war and here and there, but Moria itself, Sauron never could really overcome. So there's this. Maybe that is why they showed us a Balrog. Maybe the Balrog is causing some trouble there. The dwarves also need some conflict and some stuff to do, I guess. Even though the Balrog is a topic of the Third Age, not of the Second Age. But maybe there are also other ways to kind of draw the dwarves into the overall Middle-earth conflict with Sauron. Then another scene I want to talk about is the one where we see the so-called 3 Elven Rings of Power, because technically all 19 Rings of Power are Elven Rings. And in this scene we can clearly identify Galadriel having one, which should be Nenya. Then we see Gil-galad having one, which should be Vilya. And we see a third person holding Narya, the third of the 3 rings. And if we look into the books, we know Círdan gets Narya, the ring, and he later gives it to Gandalf. So that hand here should belong to Círdan, which is pretty cool. It's one of my favorite side characters of the elves, and I hope that we will see him in the show. Another possibility, and that would be of course against what is written in the books, is that this is the hand of Celebrimbor and he keeps only Narya and already gives the other 2 away. But like I said, that is very different in the books. There, the elves of Eregion keep all the 19 rings for themselves, and only after the one ring is created and Celebrimbor and the elf sees through the plan of Sauron and took the rings from their fingers before he can control them, only then Celebrimbor decides to give at least his magnum opus, the 3 most powerful rings he made, away. And before, in one version, he also has counsel with Galadriel, leaves 1 ring there because they do not find the strength to destroy them, and the other 2 he sent to Gil-galad, who gives then at some point later Narya to his advisor and shipwright Círdan. And before the War of the Last Alliance, Gil-galad will give his ring Vilya to Elrond. Though I should mention that Galadriel, in this version at least at this time, lived already in Lothlorien, maybe moved somewhere else at some point. She lived in Eregion before, by the way, and was one of the Eregion founders, which is also completely different in the show, because a lot of things are just so different in the show. Then we see these green leaves in this forest slowly turning into these yellow autumn colors. Maybe this is another effect of the decay, which exists in Tolkien's books as well, and it's a very important concept, but it's not as dramatic as portrayed in Season 1 of Rings of Power. The next scene is very interesting because here we see Durin the Third holding or maybe receiving a ring. And it is my interpretation of the scene that this might be one of the other 16 rings of power, or to be more specific, one of the 7 rings of power. Because according to Appendix A, the dwarves believe that Durin III received his ring not from Sauron, but from the elves of Eregion, potentially from Celebrimbor. And you might now wonder, why is there such a big gem on it? We can also read about the rings of power that each had their proper gem. That is what Gandalf says in the Council of Elrond, and only the lesser rings and the One Ring were unadorned and had basically no gem on them. Of course, it's still possible that he receives this ring from Sauron in disguise, but I think if they really go with what is written in Appendix A, this might be a gift, a token of friendship from Celebrimbor. This ring also kind of makes the dwarves more eager to mine more riches, and this could maybe lead Durin III to reopen his mithril mine. In the next scene, they kind of spoiled that Isildur probably survived what happened in Season 1, and then in the scene after that, we see a beautiful shot of Númenor. Always like those shots, to be honest. I think they did a fantastic job portraying the cities here. And we see an eagle landing on the palace. And then, at first I thought the eagle might transport Pharazôn, which makes no sense in my opinion, but maybe it just lands there to bring a message. In Tolkien's world, the eagles can actually speak. That's different in Peter Jackson films and so on. But in the books, at least, they can speak and deliver messages. And interestingly, Pharazôn draws a sword. Maybe this is kind of a sign of him rebelling against the Valar and the forces of good and the faithful and so on, and starting further to divide the kingdom of Númenor. That's at least my interpretation of this scene. Then another scene, we see the new Adar, because the actor changed and it seems like he still plays a role. Curious what is happening there exactly, and it seems like they are kind of out in the wild and not in Mordor, but maybe that's just my impression here. And further, then we see kind of catapults and so on attacking a city, which I would assume is Eregion, and that also happens in the books, that Eregion is attacked, but not by Adar, but by Sauron. So I'm very curious what will happen here exactly. And then we see the stranger and a well in the background, which looks kind of interesting. It definitely gives me vibes that it's further away. And I think they want to go east, but the east usually is not that dry. It looks more like the southern region, like Harad or something. At least that's how I would imagine it, climate-wise. So that's a bit unusual that if they go east, that it becomes suddenly more dry there. But who knows how they interpret these regions. In the scene, we see him hitting the ground with a small staff, so maybe he's practicing his Gandalf signature move. I still hope it's not Gandalf, but maybe one of the Blue Wizards, because the Istari, especially if you only have rights to Lord of the Rings, only appear in the Third Age. There's only one version, and that is published in Peoples of Middle-earth, not even Unfinished Tales, though I think it's referenced in Unfinished Tales, that the wizards, 2 wizards to be precise, the 2 blue wizards, arrived already in the Second Age, and then the others come in the Third Age. So, like I said, this is lore-wise not that great. The Istari are, in my opinion, mostly a topic of the Third Age, though if they go east, they can definitely make the blue wizards work. In the next shot, we also see like a sandstorm or whatever, shockwave, and I think it's the silhouette of Nori holding on to a rope or something, but that is most likely Nori we see here, and it's interestingly the only time we see a Half-Foot at all in the whole teaser, so maybe they play a smaller part besides Nori in Season 2. Then we see some other shots, and I want to point out that Elrond's armor looks pretty nice in my opinion. And then we have an interesting shot with Celebrimbor as he, I don't know, drops several rings. It could be 9, I counted 8 though, but 9 would make more sense in this context of having 9 and 7, so the 16 rings of power plus these 3 elven rings. And maybe he tries to destroy them or something, but like I explained earlier, they could not find the strength to do so, and it turns out that without Dragonfire they're also pretty hard to destroy, so maybe he is not able to do that. The reason why he might try to destroy these rings here is that he looks pretty beaten and wounded. He has a wound maybe in the face and on his hand, so maybe this is during the besiege of Eregion, where Sauron, spoiler, tries to get those rings in his possession, and he now tries to kind of undo what he did after he realized what he did. What might contradict this theory a bit is the next scene. Here we see also a pretty beat and wounded Celebrimbor with some guards, and they try to arrest this Anatar guy. In the background we also see stones and debris lying on the ground, so this could be during the siege of Eregion, but that would definitely contradict the books, because after Sauron creates a One Ring, Celebrimbor and the elves of Eregion understand who he really was, and then pull the rings from their fingers. And then it takes Sauron round about 100 years to build an army powerful enough to conquer everything, and then he takes Eregion. Anatar is not a thing at that point anymore. And I have the very bad feeling that they might portray all of that quite differently. Don't get me wrong, I expect changes to happen and also a lot of time compression, but I would appreciate if they at least try to adapt what Tolkien wrote when it comes to the creation of the Great Rings of Power and the resulting war of that, because it's such an important and iconic moment in the Second Age story, or in the history of the Second Age, that it feels so strange if they make complete fan fiction out of it. Like, if you don't want to adapt what Tolkien actually wrote in the major events that happening in the Second Age, then don't make an adaptation of the Second Age. Like, in the books, Anatar can leave Eregion, and nobody in Eregion has a clue who he is. And the next time they hear of Anatar, they realize who he really was, but at this point he's not in Eregion anymore. As a result, this scene that we see here is potentially contradicting. The only exception would be Sauron comes to Eregion, takes his disguise one more time to kind of fool him or mock him or something, but I really think they will change how all of this worked. They already started with creating the 3 rings of power first, which also makes no sense. And it's not only the changes, it's also that these changes often make very little sense and seem to be very confusing or very plot hole heavy. Like, are they telling me now that Halbrand, who was Sauron in disguise, comes to Celebrimbor, teaches him about alloys, and then he starts creating the 3 rings of power, then he leaves Eregion, and he takes another disguise. This time he puts on a wig, comes back to Celebrimbor, and fools him again? Is that seriously what they are telling me? Like, Halbrand came there and taught him some techniques, and then another guy comes and teaches him more of these techniques, and he can't count 1 and 1 together? Like, I can't believe that that is a story they are going for, because that is also not what Tolkien wrote. It's just mind-boggling. Stuff like this kind of makes me angry, and Whatever, let's just continue. In the next scene, we have this evil smirk of Anatar. I think Charlie Vickers does this pretty well. And then he does some gesture with the hands and then cut to this tower and then this explosion. What's interesting, if we look closely, we see initially that this tower, that there's like at least something green still there and a little river, then it explodes and then ice is kind of spreading from the tower. Not sure if this is like a flashback or something that tries to explain how this icy area Galadriel visits at the beginning of Season 1 came to be. Maybe this is also, I don't know, an early stage of Barad-dûr. We know when the One Ring is created that the foundations of Barad-dûr are also connected to the One Ring, so they can't be destroyed as long as the One Ring is not undone. So maybe this explosion kind of symbolizes or visualizes this connection with the One Ring when it's forged. Also a possibility, though it is not icy in Mordor, so I would assume it's kind of the explanation for the other place that we have seen earlier in Season 1. If you look at this rock here at the side, you see how ice is crawling up. You hear an icy sound, and also even on the letters of Rings of Power, you see a little bit of ice that vanishes. So I would assume we are talking about ice here, not ash. In chat, somebody asked an interesting question during stream, and that was if this could be connected to Angmar. And we know that Angmar is in the north. It is very cold there, and there's also a fortress of the Witch King called Carn Dûm, but that was also created much later. Like the Angmar is established in the Third Age, has no place in the Second Age. I don't hope they go into this direction, but maybe this is like a predecessor to this, I don't know. Though to be fair, the Witch King, the Nine Nazgûl, first appear in the Second Age in the year 2251, according to Appendix B. And also, there is a mention, for example, that for in summer, the Witch King's power wanes, but now his breath is deadly and his cold arm is long. So in the context of Appendix A, we get some ideas that the Witch King and cold is somewhat connected, though this is of course in context of the Third Age. Further, there was also some additional behind the scenes material, and there's one scene where we see a very strange figure in red robes, and he looks like an undead, if that makes sense. And my first thought would be that this might be one of the Nazgûl, maybe even the Witch King, and we see how he comes to be, but it's hard to tell. Especially, you have to consider that, first of all, Sauron needs to get the rings back and then give them to 9 of them at least to men and 6 or 7 to the dwarves. Further, it also seems that this scene has not really gone through post-production, so we see something green on his hand that might have to do with some visual effects that later are added or something, who knows. Another idea that was discussed in chat was that he might be a wight. So we know the Barrow wights from Lord of the Rings. Of course, those are created much later in the Third Age, but maybe there are some early forms. Like in the Silmarillion, we also have phantoms and other ghostly beings, so it would not be unusual. Sauron is, of course, a necromancer. As a result, he might have some powers that helps him commanding beings as such, or even transforming others into those. There's also an elf to his right, and not sure who that is. Maybe it is Celeborn, who is still missing in the show. We also need that guy. And then there's another shot of an unknown elf. Maybe that is Círdan, I'm not 100% sure. He has at least for an elf grey hair, which is rare. He has no beard yet, but he's also 6,000 years younger than he is at the end of Lord of the Rings, so there's that. Interestingly, in the next shot we see a man with grey hair. First I thought it would be the stranger, but that's not fitting then. And he looks very like Gandalf, but maybe if there is like 2 wizards, these are really the blue wizards. And I really hope they go this route. Further, it's also after the Círdan shot, and we know Círdan gifted his ring Narya later to Gandalf, so they're kind of friends. Maybe it's an accident that both shots are back to back, but I don't know, I really hope they're not going for Gandalf. Then there's also this shot that is also close to the ocean, where we see Elendil and so on, and also these rock formations. And that is kind of similar to this city shot we saw in the other trailer, so that might be a further hint that this is actually in Númenor. and maybe that is really a place of the faithful where they are gathering. And last we see Isildur walking through some weird cave set, and we see some picture, especially one of a spider in the background, and there are rumors that Shelob might also be in the show, so he might meet Shelob or something. That is also something I noticed. And that are pretty much all scenes I wanted to discuss. There's one scene where Isildur has a wound on his arm and gets pulled by his horse on ropes through the forest. He needs to escape Mordor and maybe find the way to the civilization or to allies like elves or men, to a settlement of Númenor and so on. So there's still quite a few things we could discuss for sure, but the video got already far too long, but I still hope you found it interesting and enjoyed it. I hope the comment section stays nice, which is usually the case on this channel, but as soon as I mention or even think about Rings of Power for a moment, which rarely happens, then hell breaks loose in the comment section. I get a lot of weird hot takes and people start to discuss politics and skin colors and whatnot. I'm not interested in this, just to make this clear. And if you have a problem with the casting choices or whatever decisions Amazon is making, you have to direct the feedback towards Amazon in a polite fashion. That is my recommendation. They are producing the show, not me. They are calling the shots, not me. They are hiring the actors, not me. It's also not the actors' fault for being cast. That's their job. And you can also, in the comments, like or dislike the show and be still respectful to each other. That's also what I recommend. That I even have to make this long disclaimer here at the end of the video and hope somebody listens to me is just showing how heated the debate is, and it's, in my opinion, very unhealthy. But as said, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, maybe subscribe, press a like button, maybe check my other stuff. If you like game stuff, especially Elden Ring, maybe check my games channel, my Twitch and whatnot, because there a lot of Elden Ring action is happening and will happening, especially when the expansion will come out. Further, I also want to produce some lore videos here still, and if there are more news towards Rings of Power, War of the Rohirrim or whatever, I also might cover them here. In the meantime, you can also watch my lore videos here on this channel. There are plenty of those. They are long and very detailed and very book focused. So if you're into Tolkien and like the books, check that out as well. Huge shout outs to all those who support this channel with subscribes, likes, memberships and whatnot. Much appreciated. Also shout outs again to the artists who allowed me to use their fantastic artworks for my videos. Again, thank you for watching and see people next time.